I did the race.
See it in my motherfucking face.
Stay so fresh, so clean, think they like me. I wear more supreme than I hype. Only blue, no green, don't excite me. I can make a hole out your wife. Germans got up on my toes, act like Shocky. Made her get down on the bottom and she tied me. Pull up extra icy, I'm not playing hockey. Niggas think I'm weird and they don't really like me. Cause I can fuck your bitch and fuck your mom and auntie. Your girl's a 5, but your mom is a dime piece. And your auntie, her name is Miss Connie. I got one Glock, his name Clyde, the other one named Bonnie. These bitches, they think they dandy, but they be just lying. That little bitch can't throw it back, I swear that hoe be trying. When I fuck her from the front, it sound like that bitch dying. VVS, I need a vest, and need me act my diamond. I swear these niggas talk shit, but they really be hiding. As that boy bitch on my dick, that hoe, she was just riding. Diamonds on my neck, so wet, that shit look like Poseidon. I stand on my money, then my height turn to 9. Yeah. These niggas be biting. Plaza, I'm not really with the fight. Yeah. Me and her was vibing. Yeah. Your bitch call me Myra. Stay so fresh, so clean, think they like me. I wear more supreme than I hype. Only blue, no green, don't excite me. I can make a hole out your wife. Germans got up on my toes, act like Shocky. Made her get down on the bottom and she tied me. Pull up extra icy, I'm not playing hockey. Niggas think I'm weird and they don't really like me. 90,000, that's a lie, man. Yeah, I can tell you it's the real spill. Yeah, fuck your bitches for a life bill. Yeah, banana clip, I'm on C-Bone. I can't slip, no, I can't miss. I got icebergs on my neck. I can sink a ship out of space, swear I'm regular. Titanic, my whip in the hood, I'm not regular. I just brought my stick, baby. Oh, you think I give a fuck because I'm rich, baby? Come on, baby, let's have sex and have a rich, baby. She said, I thought you ain't do that well, you just missed, baby. Young nigga know I ain't chain on who's cause six, baby. I don't think they like me. But when I drop this song, I know they'll get excited. She was homie girl, but now that girl is mine. I like them girls that do that scamming and that's right. I just ran up on my bed. 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 She give me hit that be my grand. 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 Got addicted to the road. Got addicted to the stress. Got addicted to the foreigns. Got addicted to the fast. And these boys be throwing moves, and I swear that he's a fast. Man, this girl won't give me brain. Man, we call that be my grand. Man, we call it be my grand. Yeah, we call that be my grand. Yeah, we call it be my grand. Yeah, we call it be my grand. Back on my shit, and I might migrate. Anywhere you go, no niggas gon' hit. I don't run from shit, but the damn police. All blue hunters to wash my face. Stay so fresh, so clean, think they like me. I wear more supreme than I hype. Only blue, no green, don't excite me. I can make a hole out your wife. Germans got up on my toes, act like Shocky. Made her get down on the bottom and she tied me. Pull up extra icy, I'm not playing hockey. Niggas think I'm weird and they don't really like me.
I can't get no rest.
I don't really care 'cause I'm done. Y'all don't realize I'm done. There's no emotion on my face 'cause I'm done. You see me everywhere you look, no you can't hide on one. Yeah, I'm everything I said. Messing with your head, messing with your head. I said everything I said. Messing with your head, messing with your head, messing with your head. I've been texting her all night. They know I was going wrong. She left me right on red. Now I'm walking with my head down. I gotta keep my head high. I got a whole nother check, not talking AirPods. Rest in peace, my dad. Ain't no hater, you we in the same with, but only difference that you not own. I can just tell by the way that you're driving it. I pull up in that car just like it's stolen. Came along, came from the hallway. I can't stop, keep going. Yes, my life just feel like one long day. I just live in the moment.
Coming out just when the sun down. My boys, they ruthless, they cool, then they really run down. I got paper cuts, I'm running down the bills, coming in bust down. Counting with my thumb down. Money make me numb now. I don't really care 'cause I'm done.
Y'all don't realize I'm done. There's no emotion on my face 'cause I'm done. You see me everywhere you look, no you can't hide on one.
Everything I said, messing with your head, messing with your head.
I said everything I said.
Messing with your head, messing with your head, messing with your head, whoa. I just got a picture overseas, looking at my watch and this erection and this green. I'm not smoking on that good, no, I'm blowing in the streets. You ain't in my lead, the numbers stuffed up in my teeth. Tell them got a black, got a stack, black. No, I can't go outside, can't go outside. So they gonna back them up, this ain't not bad. I don't wanna get older, I'm still living in my life. Yeah, all my life, just keep going. Don't worry about that, just tighten up and keep going. Cause she gon' ride me like wait for it. I'm thinking on her body until she don't make noise. Yeah.
I don't really care 'cause I'm done. Y'all don't realize I'm done. There's no emotion on my face 'cause I'm done. You see me everywhere you look, no you can't hide on one. Yeah, everything I said. Messing with your head, messing with your head. I said everything I said. Messing with your head, messing with your head, messing with your head, I said messing with your head, messing with your head.
Don't really like that. You fought too kind. You experience of a lifetime. I see all of it. Yeah. I really appreciate you.
Fuck a beat, I was tryna beat a case, but I ain't beat that case, bitch, I did the race. Beat it up, where I nut, shorty tryna be the case, but I ain't beat the case, bitch, I did the race.
See it in my motherfucking face.
I feel like the motherfucking Grim Reaper. The biggest smoke blower. Put a motherfucking chimney on my stick.
Fatality.
Brand new mat, daddy with the drum attached. You a shit, but we got drums for that. Tryna fit right, boy, you dumb for that. You gon' get a bullet in your lung for that. Draco get the kickin' like Luke Kane. F&N on me in the mood sign. Glock 19 in the blue flame. Scrap when I sit inside your booth thing. 21 of water, we'll never die. Loyal to my brothers, I never lie. Call me bird dog, cause I cheat and I'm fly. And I love winning, I'm upset if it's a tie. Get you off the ground just to knock you to the floor. Let's go blow for blow. Let's go toe to toe. When it's time to battle, they don't never ever show. When it's time to battle, I'm the first one at the door. At the door, with a Draco. Don't nobody move, I don't wanna have to blow. Rapping ass niggas get spent at they show. So I need some help, I got a fetish for the smoke. It get fatal in the bottom, used to rumble in the den. Hit 'em with a combo, gotta finish him. They can't make you brown since you think you want a grand. Seems like all the models just be falling in my DM. Cooler on the tech, it get hot like scorpion. I burn his ass, little buster. You thought it was straight, I got some chemicals in this magazine. I perm his ass, swank ass nigga. Wanna be a gangster, but he misguided, bitch. I burn his ass, you went against me and they called 911. They had to infirm his ass, you gon' be next, nigga. How many talks you done got popped? Whole bunch. How many times you ran from the smoke? Niggas not once. Eastside nigga fucking all the hoes and I love guns. Ain't no fucking diamonds in my mouth, nigga, we go front. And we know that handle all the business, nigga, ASAP. Had her at the slaughterhouse, how the fuck you take that? Ain't nobody shots, nigga, you know I told him face that. Now he in the ocean, heard they hit him in his face cap. You took your shot and you missed it. I just beat it up and you kissed it. Took the rap game and I milked it. Took the rap beef and I killed it. Leg all froze like Sub-Zero, dog. Straight up. He wiped the thought, he a hero, dog. Straight up. All I care about is my De Niro, dog. Oh God. Only thing I'm chasing is De Niro's, dog. Straight up. Dread-headed killer like Cyrax. Brought a gun to a fist fight like Jack. Nah, fuck that. Only thing scare me is a rat snitch. Slaughter gang. Gotta act straight up. And they respect my mind. If you foul out, get a text by now. If you win 100, don't text my line. If you know you hating, don't check my lies. You know I slaughter gang, so the smoke is immortal. Ain't nothing changed, I slaughter your daughter. She said she was a dime, but her friend was a quarter. I had a threesome, then I flushed the rubber down the toilet. She tried to give me head, it was boring. Codeine, got a nigga snoring. I wonder if she would've slept with the 4 me. 7 keep a Draco in it cornmeal. Chopper cut you up like a tunnel. My chopper in the band, it's a drum. Russell Westbrook, I was striking like the thunder. You was somewhere running around, running to your mama. Y'all play conservative, we gon' send a bleach. I'm the type to catch a tick, 5, hit him in his shit. You think he a made man, hit him in the head. Don't you try to run out, hit him in the leg. People wanna say the stuff I say, but they be scared. Child turn the light skin, pretty boy red. It's a fatality if you try to handle me. Real top shotter, don't you ever try to ramp with me. Got enough bullets that can kill your whole camp with me. I was bad as hell in school, they even tried to counsel me. I don't like to talk, don't you try to tongue wrestle. And my block good, you'll never get the best of me. Straight up. You know I slaughter gang, so the smoke is immortal. Ain't nothing changed, I slaughter your daughter. She said she was a dime, but her friend was a quarter. I had a threesome, then I flushed the rubber down the toilet. She tried to give me head, it was boring.
time, just a little bit. One time, just a little bit. One time, just a little bit. I don't wanna get close. I haven't been the same since I loved that hoe. I haven't been the same since I lost my bro. I say I'm gonna change when I know I won't. I get high, I love to smoke. She gon' lie like I'm a joke. You wanna take flights across the coast. Remember those times, no horoscope. Life goes on, I can't take breaks. I need faith, no, I need faith. In my mind, I can't escape. I climb these heights like I'm a ape. Shine so bright in a world so dark. Break the bank, I'ma break the chalk. Two-door coupe, just push the start. Climb right in, let me break your heart. I don't need no one. I don't need no one. I don't need no one. Still never sober. Still never sober. Got the world on my shoulders. Coming out bolder. Yeah, I'm coming out bolder. I ride with my soldiers. Ride for my soldiers. Thought that I told ya. I thought that I told ya. I don't wanna get close. I haven't been the same since I loved that hoe. Haven't been the same since I lost my bro. I say I'm gonna change when I know I won't. I get high, I love to smoke. She gon' lie like I'm a joke. You wanna take flights across the coast. Remember those times, no horoscope. I don't wanna get close. I haven't been the same since I loved that hoe. Haven't been the same since I lost my bro. I say I'm gonna change when I know I won't. I get high, I love to smoke. She gon' lie like I'm a joke. You wanna take flights across the coast. Remember those times, no horoscope. I don't want the fame. I don't wanna play these games. Tired of hiding from the pain. Never hanging with the lames. I'm not the one for the stupid shit. We shot a scene on some movie shit. And she came right through on some groupie shit. Be surprised how they act when they know you lit. I don't wanna get close. I haven't been the same since I loved that hoe. I haven't been the same since I lost my bro. When I say I'm gonna change when I know I won't. I get high, I love to smoke. She gon' lie like I'm a joke. You wanna take flights across the coast. Remember those times, no horoscope. I don't wanna get close. I haven't been the same since I loved that hoe.
like the ceiling. Saying per Molly, we got hella things. I'm in love with the boy, gave it a wedding ring. And that's why I had these shots before I got the fame. And that's why I had a Glock before I got the change. I'm in Boston with Perusa, now I don't need bang. Shout out G with ARL, yeah, hold that the game. Shout out G, that my boo, she know that I claim. Shooting at these niggas like I'm in the pain. Yeah, woke up like this. Woke up to niggas talking like talk. Woke up to niggas sounding like talk. Woke up to niggas talking like talk. Woke up to niggas sounding like talk. Woke up to niggas talking like talk. Woke up to niggas sounding like talk. Woke up to niggas talking like talk. Woke up to niggas sounding like
Why you jacking static till we roll off? I got all these bitches loving me like I ain't so soft. Start talking with your chest, so bitty bitch, you better hold off. Don't let hit my jacket when she hit me till I hold off. I just need somebody, to treat me like somebody, and I like anybody, All you gotta do is love me for me, girl. I just want somebody, to treat me like somebody, and I like anybody, All you gotta do is love me for me, girl. I just want somebody, to treat me like somebody, You wanna talk, you better call me. Don't gotta wait, don't gotta storm it. You know I'm on my phone, I pick it up when it ring. You know I hit you back 'cause you was my everything. You know you be my queen if you let me be the king. You know you wanna dance, so I got you with anything. Why you jacking static till we roll off? I got all these bitches loving me like I ain't so soft. Start talking with your chest, so bitty bitch, you better hold off. Don't let hit my jacket when she hit me till I hold off. I just want somebody, to treat me like somebody, and I like anybody, All you gotta do is love me for me, girl. I just want somebody, to treat me like somebody, and I like anybody, All you gotta do is love me for me, girl.
I'm sick of acting like everything's okay when it's not good. Nowadays everybody wanna be top one. I don't feel nobody, I be talking to my shotgun. Nigga, you see that my shotty playing shotgun, but I need somebody, yeah. I'm just moving body, yeah. My car key got a button, it's started. I don't think they looking really fucking with artists. King the jungle in the Rari. You lying, you fucking somebody else. Well, hey, baby, daddy, you like the party, yeah. Don't you call me my nickname, don't call me Hardy, yeah.
Why you jacking static till we roll off? I got all these bitches loving me like I ain't so soft. Start talking with your chest, so bitty bitch, you better hold off. Don't let hit my jacket when she hit me till I hold off. I just want somebody, to treat me like somebody, and I like anybody, All you gotta do is love me for me, girl. I just want somebody, to treat me like somebody, and I like anybody, All you gotta do is love me for me, girl.
I just want somebody.
What's poppin'? Brand new whip, just hopped in. I got options, I can pass that bitch like Stockton. Just joshing, I'm spending this holiday locked in. My body got rid of them toxins. Sports in the top 10. I can put the ball in the end zone, put a bad bitch in the friend zone. This shit sound like an intro jet song, give me that tempo. Told Pooh, he a fool with the shit. Told her don't let her friends know. In the building, I move like a dime. Eating fettuccine and Vincenzo. Me and my amigos got that free smoke on the West Coast. Yeah, I'm talking about pre-rolls. Dark hair bitch, she look like she go. She do. Hometown hero, feeling myself, can't murder my ego. She heard my deep stroke, she said, babe, does it hurt when I deep though? Certified freak hoe, hang around dust and she learning my lingo. Back then, wasn't worried about me though. In the gym, trying to work on my free throw. Goddamn. Spending money at the club like Sam's. Yes, ma'am. She a little freak on cam. She don't put this on the ground. Little boys trying to diss on the ground. Hey, I can't switch on the fan. Shit's hot, hit the switch on the fan. This where my head is. I feel resentment from every direction. Even some homies be wearing expressions. I be discouraged from sharing my blessings. We used to share a connection. Now it just feels like it's wearing and stretching. I'm getting real sick of taking advice from people that never could stare at reflections. Somewhere in there is a lesson. Y'all ain't evolving, it's very depressing. I'm at the club with the basketball team. Me and the Cardinals are sharing a section. Gotta cherish the present. I'm drinking water and wearing protection. Got a career and I'm very invested. Some people call it a scary obsession. I like to call it a passion. I can be sitting relaxing. PG, we getting some traction. I'm at the venue, it's packed in. I'm digging her accent. I got a BB Simon belt on me. If she tryna get it, I'm passing. That's my type of distraction. That's my type of she Latin. Got my own flow and I'm about to get a patent. Brand new sheets for the bed, they satin. Y'all wasn't tuned in back then. My swag, they keep checking. I ain't doing no verse, quit asking. What's poppin'? Brand new whip, just hopped in. I got options, I can pass that bitch like Stockton. Just joshing, I'm spending this holiday locked in. My body got rid of them toxins. Sports in the top 10.
chocolate beware.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the latest edition of World Bros. I'm Big Wise of Force. Joining me in, as always, are my two comrades here in Los Angeles and out on the planet of Brooklyn, Nando Vila, and Michael Jamal Brooks. What's happening with you fellas?
Not much, man.
On today's show, we're going to get to the passing. Is somebody? Oh, okay.
So
Is that you?
It's not me.
We're gonna get a copyright
It's
strike on that.
definitely
Yeah.
not me. Okay, and on today's show, we're gonna get to the untimely passing. Well, I mean the guy was 92, but still sad that Jerry Stiller passed away. Legendary comic. We're gonna pay tribute to him. As you guys have been noticing, as my astute colleague Nando pointed out, the normies are starting to get hitched to the idea that China's to blame for everything. Like, you're seeing this all over the place. Like, people that don't necessarily read the Jacobin,
Right.
you know what I'm saying? And get their news intake from, just the nightly news, whether it be CNN or just their local broadcast. Those kinds of people are now getting onto the whole China did it angle. And we're going to get into the China blame game. But first, we don't usually get into geopolitics here on Woke Bros. We usually try to stay domestic, but something happened out in South America, out in Venezuela, that was just a little too ridiculously funny, stupid, hilarious, not to cover here. And so, Nando, I wanted to open this up to you. Could you give us a brief breakdown of what happened with this botched coup attempt out in Venezuela?
And was your family involved?
I definitely have some very close friends from Miami who were probably involved in some way. Um, but yeah, I mean, okay, so a couple weeks ago, the Venezuelan government announced that they had stopped a coup attempt on Nicolas Maduro. And in the days since, the details have come out and they're just fucking hilarious. So turns out they stopped these two basically fishing boats filled with former Venezuelan commandos, and including two American commandos, whose goal was to overthrow Nicolas Maduro. I mean, this was like 50 people on two boats, not, and they got into a little firefight. The Venezuelan military, which is very well armed and very large, killed 8 of them and arrested 13 of the Venezuelans, and including arrested the 2 Americans who were there with their passports, with identifying documents, just the classic thing that you do when you're doing a covert mission. You bring your ID, and and since
I want to make
then,
sure I have 2 forms of identification, bro.
right, I'm sure that they were thinking like in their heads, like I better have my American passport because like once the Venezuelans like capture us, like if we just flash our American passports, they'll let us go. It's in the days since it's come out, like the details of this coup and this operation and how it all came to be, and they're just so perfect for our time. They're like our time distilled into its pure essence. So turns out there's this guy named Justin Goudreau, who was a former American Green Beret, born in Canada, actually, also fought in the Canadian military, but he was in the American Special Forces, Army Special Forces, from 2001 to 2016. So basically, like the entire war on terror, he was there fighting it. He, tons of medals, 3 Bronze Stars. And since he retired, he founded this private security firm, like a lot of former Special Forces guys do. And, he pitched himself all over the place. He tried to do this like very strange scheme after the Parkland shooting, in which he would go to schools in Florida and be like to all the parents, if you guys pay me $8.99 a day or a month, I'll send in special forces into the schools disguised as teachers to protect your kids. So like for the price of a Netflix, for the price of a Netflix subscription, you get some special forces guys disguised as teachers. I mean, how this whole thing would work is like insane. It's unclear whether any of it actually came to be. And then he became a private security contractor for some rich people in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, and God knows what he did there. And then it seems like he got in touch with the Trump administration and did security for a rally. And then he got hired by Richard Branson, who put on that fucking insane concert on the border between Colombia and Venezuela to like promote regime change in Venezuela. And he did. So embarrassing, man. It's so embarrassing. And then, so that's when he first went to, that region and sort of got turned on to the whole Venezuelan issue. And he started meeting some, Venezuelan dissidents and anti-Maduro people in that concert. And one of them was this guy named Clive Alcalá, who is a retired Venezuelan general who used to be like pro-Chavez and has since kind of defected and gone to the other side. And he's based in Colombia. And as far as I can tell, this guy is like a total insane, like psychopath who has been caught like working with Colombian guerrillas to give them surface-to-air missiles in exchange for cocaine, trying all kinds of harebrained plots to overthrow Maduro. Anyway, this guy and Goudreau got in contact and they hatched this plan along with some very high-level people in Guaido's circle, including this guy in Miami named JJ Rendon, who's like, as far as I can tell, is like a political consultant who runs the dissident movement, the Venezuelan kind of diaspora in Miami, the anti-Maduro group of people in Miami. And they basically came up with this plan to send in private contractors and these mercenaries to overthrow Maduro. And it all fell apart very quickly, as you can imagine. And it just like the comical nature of it, like the fact that this like insane plot, like the Venezuelan military is huge and very well armed. And it's like the thought that like a few dozen guys can pull this off is just like absolutely insane. But it just all feeds into this kind of insane grifty mentality that has taken over the world, in which like everyone is just trying to like fake it till they make it. And like this guy reminds me a lot of the Firefest guy, you know, like at one point, like it all was kind of falling apart and he was probably just like, fuck it, let's do it and be legends, you know, like of course it all fell apart. But anyway, it's just like, it's just like this hilarious thing that happened that, you know, if it weren't so funny, it'd be depressing because obviously he fits into this whole narrative of like that we should just do regime change in Venezuela. That, you know, this guy Guaido, who is obviously this fucking clown, is the legitimate recognized president of Venezuela by the United States and like 60 other governments in the world. You know, this guy who's like actively trying to kill Maduro. Like, it's just insane.
You got to realize when I interviewed, and not just Americans in general, how crazy it is and how delusional they are about Venezuela just because of the relentless, basically, state corporate propaganda. That when we were in Brazil interviewing Lula, and of course Lula is going to oppose U.S. coups in general, but he's also, especially when he's speaking, I mean, he actually is very conscious of what his position doesn't change, but when he's speaking to like a left media, he might be more willing to, you know, like he's got criticisms of everybody. So it isn't even necessarily that he's, you know, like, you know, as the right wing would present it, like in the tank for Maduro or something, but he opposes U.S. coup mongering and trying to reverse the left in Latin America. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that you have to realize that he just doesn't get it. Like, he's just like, he gets U.S. coups, he gets U.S. foreign policy, he has an intricate understanding of Venezuela, all of this stuff. But the part of just like, he's like, and then there's this guy that just says he's president and he just starts laughing. Like, he's just like, what? Like how does like all the other parts tracked? Like, the United States has interfered in Brazil. The United States, like, there's geostrategic interests. We've got to resist as Latin America and all this other stuff. But that one particular part of like, who the fuck is this Juan Guaido guy? And like, where does he get off saying he's president?
He put his
what are
signature.
you talking about? Like,
he put his signature on the document with this guy Goudreau, like the silver court, like the document that it's like you never get a paper in these things. Like you never get an actual physical copy of the paper which says like we're gonna do the bad thing. Like it's always
we're going to do the murderous coup.
Yeah.
And then the other part of it,
fucking signature on it.
Put his fucking signature on it. But again, like Nancy
Only the
Pelosi
best people.
Nancy Pelosi gave him a standing O. And you know, the two other things I want to say on this. One is that we don't know U.S. involvement. I think it's too clever for the Trump administration, honestly. And honestly, they're such thugs that I don't think they need the excuse. But the only thing that I have heard that is a little bit more concerning is the idea that this is bait, basically. Like, oh, okay, well, now you have Americans hostage. Who cares that they were there as an act of terrorism? You've got them. So now we're going to invade you. And Mike Pompeo did that real thuggish. Yeah. He's such a fat bag of shit. He did that real thuggish, like he was just like, well, trust me, like if we were involved, would have went down a lot different.
No way.
On the last point, with this guy, JJ Rondon is really interesting figure because I know like now everybody, because of like Russiagate and how stupid like liberals got about like election hacking and everything, I feel like it's almost gotten to the point where because that conversation became so stupid, it doesn't mean that like manipulating public opinion through like disinformation online or potentially hacking elections isn't a real thing. And apropos of that, there was a piece that came out in March 31st, 2016 in Bloomberg, actually. It was an amazing piece called How to Hack an Election. And this Colombian computer programmer, Andres Sepulveda, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, was basically from like a maximum security prison, was like starting in 2005, basically, I helped hack and do bot campaigns and all of this shit for right-wing candidates across Latin America. And he accused this guy, JJ Rondon, and Rondon, I think threatened to sue Bloomberg and all this stuff. But like he had emails. He didn't just say it. That JJ Rendon was like his point person for not only these dirty tricks, but also protect, in some cases, potentially like cutting deals with cartels in different countries and stuff like that. So there's a lot to that. And it is funny that JJ Rendon will go to a TED Talk and do like this is how you bring democracy to my country.
Yeah.
And it's like, he's actually this very sinister right-wing figure,
Well, the other thing that's funny to me is that the epithet that Maduro always gets in the U.S. media is murderous dictator. He's a murderous dictator. He's a murderous dictator. If he were actually like such a murderous dictator, the fact that he hasn't like executed Guaido yet, like literally, like the guy put his fucking signature on a piece of paper that says like hiring a psychopath Green Beret to murder me, like imagine like in the United States, what would happen if like some Democratic congressman had set up even like a meeting with a private
some like
contractor
Ukrainian...
to like off, some Ukrainian fucking Nazis to off Donald Trump,
and then signed a document that said, here's the cash.
Yeah, exactly. Like here's a bag full of money.
Barack Obama won a third term, and I contract you to take fishing vessels into the Potomac.
Yeah. Like the fact that Guaido, like at very least, isn't in jail right now. Like what is going on? Like what kind of authoritarian dictator is he?
Kid operate like
he just travels freely to Miami,
being like, I'm the president, and he gets to meet with heads of states. He gets a standing O in Congress. When he goes back to Venezuela, they like throw rice at him at the airport.
Yeah. the other hilarious thing is that Guaido, of course, like had his signature on the document, and he was like, no, I didn't know this guy. Like he denied it, and then like a day later, the Maduro government releases a recording. They have an actual recording of a conversation that Guaido had with this Goudreau guy. Like there was like one step ahead of him. He's just like the biggest shithead on the planet. He like travels around with his astrology advisor. Like he has like a full-time page.
Now I don't see what the problem with that is. I don't know why everybody's got to get dirty on astrology.
Now I'm ready for the Netflix show on this guy, man.
Yeah.
Narcos Venezuela. We gotta get some great Latin American actor to portray this dude, because he sounds like a Bond villain at this point.
I mean, I don't know, Guaido. I'm gonna say
fucking idiot.
This is a Coen Brothers job.
Yeah, this is
right.
Or like an Armando Iannucci like movie.
Yeah,
feels like a.
Like, you signed the fucking papers?
You signed
it? That'd be so awesome. Just like a Death Stalin, it's all in Venezuela and Colombia, but they all just have like obnoxious British accents, and It's just like, you signed the fucking papers for the coup. Just like, it was a fucking agreement. Nancy Pelosi offered to give me a hand job. What's the problem?
Dude, he was a fucking tourist. I thought he was not being imbibed.
And it's just crazy, man, that like, people that were supposed to be taken seriously in the U.S. government, it's like, that's one of my dudes, know, like this is somebody I'm willing to consort with. And then, just the freaking, obviously everybody gets to go out and make a living, but like this shit is problematic.
I would say being international mercenaries.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
I mean,
international murder for hire cartels.
The stuff in Puerto Rico gets like glossed over in all the reporting, but it's like, what the fuck was this guy doing? Like, Puerto Rico like became like almost like a failed state after Hurricane Maria. It was just like basically like the rich people were fucking terrified that like all the poors were gonna come steal like everything. So they probably hired like all these mercenaries to like protect their property and shit, and like who knows like what the fuck they were doing, like just murdering people left and right, like anyone that they thought was like getting too close or something. Like like we really do need to have like a federal jobs program just for former Green Berets that go crazy in the war on terror, just so they don't keep doing it like all over the place. We need to find some sort of like like reinsertion program to society.
But it's a real instrument of foreign policy. I mean, this stuff is used. I mean, it just so happens to be that this is kind of comical. But I mean, going back to everybody knew about Blackwater, back in the Bush era, how they were used in Afghanistan and Iraq. These companies are all over, particularly in Africa. Eric Prince is still around. Eric Prince is tight with the Trump administration, and he's also pitching business to the Chinese for their projects in Africa and for Gulf countries as well. So actually,
And for a Venezuelan coup.
Whoa, Mike.
and for a Venezuelan coup.
According to Google, Eric Prince is an American businessman philanthropist, former Navy SEAL, and
Yeah.
founder of the private military company Blackwater.
Your classic philanthropist slash mercenary.
Slash killer. Right. Right. You meet those kind of people on the east side of LA every day, Nando.
Blackwater guys killed people in Iraq it was the Nisour Square massacre, and it was so flagrant that they actually got pressed charges for murder in the United States.
Yeah.
Now think of what the U.S.
What
military
must have been.
itself. Yeah, like I'm sorry, I'm not demonizing any, like definitely not individual members of the military, but I'm sorry. Are we fucking children? Everybody, if you go to another place, you're murdering people and violating human rights every fucking hour, and let alone a bunch of roided up private security contractors. And they opened fire and lit up a square to the extent that everybody was, for a minute, was like, well, at least in this specific instance, you went too far.
Yeah.
Yeah, on that note, man, jeez, that's a good laugh. I hadn't really been up on that until Nando actually shared that with the group earlier, and that's just incredible. But we move on to the China panic because it's inevitable. It's like it's kind of how politics function, and in a lot of ways how it's always functioned. Like there's always a sort of buck passing / blame game that goes on whenever something horrific happens, right? This happens to be not only just a global pandemic, but a recession, depression, financial meltdown. There's no other way to describe it. 30 million people on unemployment right now, and that number is only going to get higher and higher and higher as we continue to battle this thing. And, the administration's favorite, sort of whipping boy has been the Chinese government. And I want to say, first of all, we don't, just because this happens a lot of times, like just because Trump says something, there's an impulse to go with the equal and opposite of whatever it is that he said, that, just because he's calling China the evil empire, we have to then call them, like, I don't even know, the Force or whatever. Like, I don't watch Star Wars. I don't know what the freaking analogy is, but Star Wars. But you get my drift here, right? Like, I think there's an impulse for certain liberals to be like, no, China did this, and China's actually handled it great. And China's like, well, no, China lied about a lot of the facts. They were slow in rolling this shit out. They were freaking jailing doctors and shit who were trying to get the information out very early on in the process. They weren't great. But, by January, they had told us about it. I think it was January 18th, we got our first case, and we didn't shut down the freaking country or do and all of the things that needed to be done. Not just because, like, the shelter in place is just one freaking measure, right? Like, it's like putting a Band-Aid or putting peroxide in a freaking gash. Like, it's one thing, but you got to do a whole bunch of other things. You got to sew it up, clean it up. You got to do all of these other things in concert with that to make sure that everything gets back rolling. But, there's this idea out there that basically China made this in a lab. This is freaking, economic warfare. Meanwhile, by the way, we're the biggest Chinese consumer in the world. The idea that China wants less money from us to hurt themselves. I don't even, we're so intertwined with the Chinese economy. Like, this idea that they want to kill America off so that they can make no more money ever again. Somebody would have to explain that to somebody as dumb as me. But, you're seeing it out there, though. Like we mentioned it at the top of the show, that it's more and more you're starting to hear people say, man, China really fucked this year, didn't they? China. I just wanted to open up the discussion for you guys to, like, how people should be approaching this information and, like, the proper context to put China's role in all of this.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely noticed it in my life. People asking me about China and all manner of things, not just with the coronavirus thing, but 5G and like whether that's going to kill us all. And it's just it's starting to feel like we're creating the new monster, right? Like we're the American empire. We always need to have a big monster to slay. For a long time, it was the Soviet Union. That was like the perfect villain for the American empire. And then when the Soviet Union went away, we needed to create a new one, and that was jihadi terrorism. And now no one gives a shit about that. Like no one gives a shit about ISIS or
it's
like,
over.
It's
over
man.
for terrorism.
Yeah, man, we're fucking tired.
Really
of that. Yeah,
that should be the name of the episode, by the way.
Yeah,
it's over for terrorism.
It's over for terrorism.
Right.
Like jihadi terrorists could like blow up like some fucking and like no, I'd be like, like no, like people are they need a new one. They need a fresh.
Moved on to China and Mexico.
So yeah, China is the new big bad. It's the new big bad of the American empire. So you're starting to see, obviously like on the right.
He's like, no, I beat ISIS. It can't. We can't talk.
Terrible.
About that.
Yeah.
A lot of people died. This was a pretty bad incident. Yeah, but it doesn't.
ISIS was the last.
I actually heard that
ISIS was the last one.
Yeah.
Like they literally tried to bring terrorism out from under the ground with ISIS, like Night of the Living Dead type shit.
They had a cool
name. It worked
name
for like 3 weeks though.
ISIS was the last dance, man.
Yeah.
The beheading videos, all of that. It worked for 3 weeks, and then people was like, all right, back to Britney Spears.
Yeah, because like even like with Syria, like no one cared. Like people tried to get like the Syria thing.
Right. Although it was like just this multi-front proxy war with every single actor in the world practically committing war crimes. Well,
everyone's like,
fuck it.
But China's easy because China's big, and more importantly, when's the Chinese economy going to overtake the United States as number one in the world? Like in a few years, like that psychologically, for the American kind of id is going to be. Like there's gonna be like we're gonna fucking do all kinds of crazy shit when that happens. Like I'm already foreseeing like all manner of like, and they're not just gonna like take it gracefully. Like, okay, we're now number 2. Like we've been number 1 since World War II, and now we're number 2. Like that's gonna fuck with our heads tremendously. But like with the whole China thing, like it's like what do you like? What is the upshot? Like war? Like we're gonna fight China in a war? Like they'll kick our ass? Like or they're like, and it's, like at the very worst, like. Yeah, nuclear exchange. Like, what are we talking about?
Even the biggest idiot military hawks in Washington know that, like, there is no winning a war against China.
No.
Like, sure, maybe it doesn't end in, the Chinese Communist Party basically doing what the Nazis did in Paris and New York City. Like, maybe it doesn't end like that. Yeah. But like, there's no winning a war against China. Like, even these delusional pricks won't even go that far.
But Mike, you did a good segment on your show about like the sort of the economic underpinnings of all this, and I think it's interesting to sort of summarize that.
Yeah, and I think everything you guys said tracks with me for sure, and I think it's that this already started earlier than Trump. Like as with all things, Trump is going to do it in the most stupid, belligerent way possible, and he's got, like I don't know what Steve Bannon actually thinks. I'm not interested in mythologizing Steve Bannon, but Steve Bannon might be a guy who, says like we're going to have a war with China in 10 years. And I mean, I don't know what that guy thinks. I know that guy, was not as successful as he felt he deserved to be, and if we could have just like made him successfully produce a fucking rap musical or like Boys in the Hood Part 2 or whatever the fuck he was trying to do in the 90s, we would be in a better world. But besides that, like I think Obama did the pivot to Asia in 2014, and that was already tracking with this idea that China's the emerging power and we need to contain it. And that involves 5G. Basically, that's like the next wave of, as far as I can understand. I mean, that's going to be like the platform as we get into so-called smart cities and intelligent appliances.
The metaverse.
The metaverse. I mean, honestly, stuff that we should be resisting and not wanting to do anyways in a lot of ways. Or at the very least, like the idea that we're going to say, like, yeah, the whole world is a competition between Silicon Valley companies and like Chinese alternatives should be fucking terrifying for the idea of privacy, democracy and openness. It's I mean, that should just be like resisted in
Did you see that video in Singapore of the dog robot just like walking through a park being like, you there, like stop fucking, making out, like social distancing.
Yeah,
and
like
the dog
social
just keeps
distancing,
walking.
and with a camera that is monitoring people's comings and goings. And by the way, also like that's a Boston. I think Boston Dynamics made that robot. Like, it's terrifying enough. That's the cute version. They don't show you like they're putting guns on those things. They're putting like
laser
those
beam.
things. Like, are you fucking kidding me? So like. And then we all know, like, and then it's like, yeah, like, forget when you get into like, all right, we're going to police certain areas differently. We're going to build in biases on class and race and everything else and actually build that into technology. I mean, that's a whole other. So anyways, there's the competition over 5G because China's dominating that. Then there's just, even if you're not going to like fight a war, you still have to justify the fact that we spend more on our military than the next however many countries combined. Bingo. So you go and you look at these think tanks.
Now that terrorism is over and we've declared the war on terror, it's
shit. And that's why you look at like anytime a think tank puts out like a, we've got to think about the Pacific in the 21st century.
The best one is the best think tank bullshit on China is like we gotta maintain dominance over the South China Sea.
Yeah, like
and say South China Sea, and you sound like you get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars in DC.
Exactly, and you look at the list, and it's it's Raytheon, it's Boeing, and again, this shit is simple. Like there might be one or two ones that honestly I think are they are a little bit complicated. Like I'm not gonna lie, I feel for Taiwan. That's a fucking tough situation, and Taiwan is definitely. Funnily enough, even though it's like literally founded by like an escaping, authoritarian right-wing army, and the Maoists beat them and they flee to Taiwan.
As if the Venezuelans in Miami had their own country.
Yeah,
in Miami.
they created a military dictatorship, but somehow through a process in the 80s, 90s, and now today, they've got it's not like some great progressive country, but they've got like a legit functioning democracy with a nice social democratic lady leading it. And, I don't want them to just be like reclaimed by another hegemon. I get like that there are difficult questions here in the same way that like I want China to play a role in Latin America because that helps Latin American countries get out from under the United States like that. Like, so if I'm Vietnam or Korea or whatever, I want to try to play as many sides as possible. But at the end of the day, I'm sorry, guys, like, China is going to have influence over its part of the world. And it's a really bizarre, it's a historical anomaly of even like the last 400 years that Asia is not a world power. And so the question is like, what is that going to look like? How can that be constructive? And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of other stuff to it. But the bottom line is that when China was a sweatshop and we undercut labor here, made cheap shit there, imported it back here.
Speak on it.
That was cool for everybody. But now that all of a sudden China's like, no, we're not just making rugs, we're making 5G. And we're developing our own internal markets. And
missiles.
And that's another thing. There's actual literal.
By the way, Michael,
arms sales.
They have these capabilities because that was the trade-off. It was built in. It was like, we will give you slave labor. Right. You give us technology. You give us information about how to make our own things. And you also open up your markets to those things we now make. Like, that was built into it. So when we said, fuck American labor, fuck the normal people, we're going to move everything over to China because the profits are going to soar. And that's all we ever fucking care about is the profits. Like, we're reaping what we sowed here. Like, this isn't some anomaly. Right. Like, nobody could have saw this coming. No, this was baked into the deal.
That's baked into the deal. And honestly, and that is where I agree with you. I don't think it's, productive to just go like, oh yeah, like China's the future. Everything's about China's great. Of course not. It's silly. But where I really do have like a basic sympathy with China is just on that one area that they were like, wait a second. You thought that we, as a thousands-of-year-old civilization with over 1 billion people and all this capacity, that our be-all, end-all was just to like make bath towels for Target. Like, what the fuck is with you? And incidentally, like, what, I'm sorry. Like, again, I'm sure, of course, like Huawei and all these, I'm not pronouncing that right. Of course, these companies are connected with Chinese military and intelligence and their defense.
As are the ones in the United States.
As are, what the fuck? Anyway, how many Snowden revelations do you need to read to understand? You don't think that Google and Facebook and Apple and Amazon are not interfacing with our intelligence apparatus, our foreign policy, what we're trying to do overseas? I mean, come on. Don't be a fucking child. Like, I'm not saying, like, I would, in an ideal world, we wouldn't be dominated by any superpower, let alone these two. But just don't be a child about it,
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Then I thought you wanted to jump in there. But man.
I lived in China.
Oh, I never knew that.
I lived in Shanghai for a year back in 2008, 2009 era.
And how was that?
Fucking fun as fuck.
Where you lived there?
I actually, I may have that was I definitely was watching Entourage when I was living in China. Like I remember that getting the bootleg DVDs. It was actually hilarious. There was near my apartment in China, there was a DVD store called Movie World, and it would sell bootleg DVDs, but it was like a full store. And right next to it, across the street, there was a new DVD store that opened called Even Better Than Movie World. It was great. Dude, China is
even better.
If you have a sense of humor, living in China is one of the best things ever. Like, it's just like the amount of funny shit like that was just going on every day is hilarious. But the feeling that I had when I was there was like a feeling of overwhelming sense of shit is happening. Like, this is going forward. Like, this is growing. Like, entire fucking blocks. Like, they just raise an entire city block and then raise up new buildings in a matter of months. I had a feeling, I was like, man, I'm coming from a dying society, like the American, empire. I'm just going from this down, slowly declining, society to one that is just like on overdrive, just fucking forward. I mean, obviously with tons of problems and they would relocate 50,000 people in a week, with no recourse. And they were like, no, this entire city block, you have to go move to the outskirts in these giant apartment complexes. And here's it's crazy. It was crazy the shit that was going on there. But the feeling that I had was of one of, man, they're coming, and it's they are vivacious and with energy and vitality. And what we're just managing this terminal decline.
I thought of two other quick things. One, I was out running the other day, and I listened to I was listening to a Jay-Z playlist I haven't listened to in years. And you remember in Girls, where he's talking about he had to leave her quick
because she kept bootlegging my
hit. That's one of the best rap lyrics ever.
Yeah, that's one of those things where we know why the stereotype. Yeah.
That song's great. People need to. We need to move clocks in different directions. We need to move back to a time where Donald Trump couldn't be president, and also move back to a time where Jay-Z could be #1 on the radio with that song. But I was talking I interviewed Ecuador's former foreign minister, and we talked about doing it because he was trying to cut deals with China a lot when he definitely was saying it's not that I thought that China definitely has their own problems. Of course, China is like any rich country, looks at us as a place for natural resource extraction for sure. And they try to negotiate deals that are on favorable terms to them, no doubt about it. But on one hand, it was the point we made before that it's just better if you're Ecuador to have competition with the United States. That gives us flexibility. And also that the Chinese, it's not that they're they're not pro good things in their foreign policy. It's just they are genuinely way more flexible. So it's kind of look, if you're if you're running some like really brutal state, we don't give a fuck. Let's make a train. Oh, you're doing a cool, like, you're bringing people out of poverty because you're Rafael Correa. He was foreign minister for Korea, and you're like not doing the Washington Consensus in Ecuador. Dope, great. Let's make a mining deal. Like, they definitely have a lot more flexibility, and I think that's another thing that in the United States, our mainstream media and corporate media just goes to like, see, the Chinese don't care, and because we care about human rights.
Yeah, right.
Well, that's the thing is they don't lie to themselves. They don't lie to themselves.
But on the flip side, actually, Americans are honest. We do put a lot of conditions. It's just not human rights conditions, but we force a lot of shit about how you're managing your economy, what you're doing, and the Chinese. Again, it's dangerous because they're a power that's trying to eat their way into other economies. I'm sorry, that is an innately dangerous thing. But on the other hand, they don't come in with the type of demands and preconditions. They're just like, you have your way of doing things. We have our way of doing things. What's the deal? What can we do here?
Yeah. Like I'm doing a lot of I'm working on this big project on the collapse of the Soviet Union, so I'm doing a lot of research on Russia in the 90s and like the preconditions that we applied to everything they did, and we basically like restructured their entire economy. And like if like the people within the post-Soviet Russia that were like, hey, maybe we should like build like a mixed economy with some social democratic reforms and like provide healthcare and equitable housing and all this shit. Like we were like, no fucking way. You can't do that. You're not allowed to do that. You cannot do that. You cannot do that. Like, no, you know what I mean? Like, whereas the Chinese, like but at the same time, we keep telling ourselves, and at the time we kept telling ourselves, and we still do this shit, that we're just like promoting openness and democracy and all this shit. And a lot of people, like in a weird way, like I think people do genuinely buy that shit here, that we do those things. Even the most evil people that are like not doing those shit, they tell themselves, and I think they actually believe it. Whereas the Chinese, like, they don't lie to themselves. Like, they don't tell themselves that shit. They don't have any sort of like,
because this concept of human rights abuses, it's like, all right, your human rights abuses is just Tuesday where we're from. You know what I'm saying? Like, like the idea that we even need to throw feints at these pretenses are ridiculous. But and the funny thing is, on the flip side, if you're America, it's like your most famous, biggest, richest corporations like Nike and Apple depend on that same exploitation. So even as America, like this concept that we don't partake in those kinds of things, it's pure nonsense.
It's pure nonsense. No, and I love that.
Everybody knows it. Everybody that's at the table knows it, right? Like it's that weird thing. Like I was watching I was watching this movie called Bad Education. It's an HBO original.
Oh yeah,
Hugh Jackman.
That's really good.
I haven't seen it. As good. Yeah,
so good. And what America reminds me of is at the end of the movie where Hugh Jackman like refuses to accept that it's over, and the guy's like, the fancy suits, come on. We all know what you're doing with that. You're playing dress up every day. And the shit you're doing to your face, we all can see it. We laugh at you. That's America. That's America. Like they don't, like, we just don't get that the game is over. Like, why do we do this fake shit? We don't have to operate this way anymore. Like, everybody around the world actually knows what it is we actually stand for and believe in. So when we come in and we talk about American democracy and values and wait, what about your dictator, homie? You propped up a dictator. Not only did you prop him up, you continue to support him. So what happened there? And then what happened there? Everybody, it's like no countries around the world are stupid enough to believe that the lies that the American government feeds its people about our values and democracy and freedom and all this other bullshit.
Yeah, in the late 90s, the Chinese, and this is like in a totally different era, right? They did not have the power then in the way they have now. But we would put out our like human rights reports on China. And of course, a lot of it was true. They did their own like counter human rights reports. And they were actually really funny because they were not as, I watched one like briefing on C-SPAN or something. And, they weren't like the presentation maybe has gotten more sophisticated, but definitely. But they were like, they were talking about U.S. prisons and racism.
Well, the Soviet Union was the same thing. Like, the Soviet Union did the same thing when we would be like, oh, the gulags or whatever. They're like, look at the black underclass in the American South. Like, no Soviet citizen gets treated like that. But But like, have you guys seen the Chinese propaganda videos that have been coming out for COVID? They're fucking hilarious. They're so
Send me a
fucking
link,
funny.
please.
I'll send
I
you a
would
link.
love to check it out.
Oh my god, they're like little cartoons of like, like, you say we're lying. We told you on January 16th. You guys didn't close down till March. Like, it's just like full on, like just needling in a very, very funny way that like you just don't see that often. It's pretty funny.
All right, so yes, so we can move on to Jerry Stiller, famous actor / comedian, died at the age of 92 this week. Obviously, a lot of you guys know him from Seinfeld, as amongst many other things. I just want to ask you guys your favorite memories of the guy or how you're gonna remember him.
I mean, obviously like Seinfeld, but also he was Maury Ballstein in Zoolander, which is one of the best. I mean, Zoolander was the biggest victim of 9/11 was really the Zoolander movie because it came out like 2 weeks after 9/11 and no one was like in the mood for it, so it bombed in the box office. Yeah. But then it like kind of found a new life on DVD, and Jerry Stiller was just like absolutely incredible in that movie. But yeah, I mean, and then I showed you the guy, the single payer healthcare ad that he cut in the 90s. I was like, man, what the fuck? I was like fucking shocked when I saw that. Because like no one in the 90s was talking about that shit. Like no one in the mainstream.
No, Jared, that guy was awesome. Those single payer healthcare ads are amazing, and especially the way they're answering specifically. Like you had the Clinton administration putting out some, classic. I mean, actually better than something they put out now. But some big convoluted, public-private, no one can understand it, whatever. And then the insurance and HMO industry went at it hard, and they did these. I forget the couple's name, but it was like basically like these really effective ads of this couple sitting in their kitchen table just being like, we don't have health insurance anymore, like I don't understand what happened. I guess the Clintons thought they knew better than we did or whatever. And the way the Stiller ads are awesome because they're an answer to the propaganda couple of like, there's a way of like cutting out all this bullshit. Yeah. Single payer, like everybody just gets
everyone's covered.
Stop wasting all this fucking time just so these like parasite companies can get their cut. But yeah, I mean also Murray Ballstein is one of the funny, like just the way, like even when he's like blowing the lid on the cabal and like gets into a argument with his wife about like what food to defrost. It's just, come on. And especially shit like that you've seen be copied millions of times and it's never funny. And then you just watch the one person who just nailed it.
Yeah.
That's also. Like I'm a Ben Stiller defender too. Like I think
me too.
Who's off the Ben Stiller train?
I mean, it's easy to shit on Ben Stiller because he made like family friendly stuff and was super mainstream and all of those other things. But man, Meet the Parents.
I think people started. No, I think people because he did.
They started doing all the Noah Baumbach movies.
He did too many sequels. He did.
Along Came Polly. I mean,
Along Came Polly is funny.
It is hilarious. What?
That movie like got
Philip Seymour Hoffman.
That movie won like Razzies and shit, and I'm like, that movie's fucking hilarious.
Ass movie, dude.
Yeah.
Anyway, but Jerry Stiller for me, he's George Costanza's father. Just the perfect distillation. Like you immediately understand where George Costanza comes from, his worldview, his neuroses. Like you get all of it just by meeting his parents. And Jerry Stiller is just incredible in that role, man.
The episode where Frank rediscovers his like the Korean like chick that he was banging while he was like a serviceman in the Korean War is spectacular. And like his delivery in the scene where he's like teaching George about brassieres, he's like telling him all the bra sizes and stuff, like just like the comedy of like those two going back and forth like on that scene is just absolutely perfect.
Too good. Rest in peace, Jerry Stiller. I've actually started rewatching.
Good run.
Yeah, at 92 is fantastic, man. Yeah. I've actually started rewatching Seinfeld, and he hasn't come into the early seasons yet, but looking forward to that. And make sure you watch King of Queens. Make sure you just watch the guy's work. Shouts to Jerry Stiller, his family, all of that. That's our Woke Bros for this week. Thank you guys for joining us on the live. Again, we promise you guys we're gonna make the live stuff even more, part of what we do on a regular basis. We love the interaction. We love everybody coming through. Make sure you subscribe, rate, become a Patreon of TMBS, become a Patreon of Count the Dings. Subscribe to the Entourage podcast by Nando. What's it called again, Nando?
Called Let's Pot It Out, an Entourage
Let's
podcast.
Pot It Out, an Entourage podcast by Nando Vila. Yeah, man. See you guys next week.
Oh, wait, real quick.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Mike.
Next Tuesday on the Michael Brooks Show, we're doing the crossover.
Oh, yes.
So these gentlemen are Waz.
We're going to be polluting.
Yeah.
We're gonna be polluting the intellectual space that is
I'm
the Michael
actually
Brooks Show.
ordering a cap with a feather in it just for that episode.
I'm gonna get naked.
And Mike, I ordered your book 2 days ago on Amazon. That's on its way. Can't wait to get started on that joint. So make sure you go pick up Michael Brooks's book. What's Against the Web?
Against the Web. You see it back there.
Against the Web by Michael Brooks. Yeah, man. See you guys soon. Thanks for tuning in again. We're out of here. Thanks, guys. Peace.
That's better.
Thanks for listening.